All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about field testing. That's mostly what I do. And I'm going to talk about something called Field Testing Guide, which isn't something that exists yet. So I'm looking forward to feedback and hopefully figuring out how to develop this so that it becomes a really useful tool for the whole community. So what am I going to actually talk about? Well, what the FPG, why the FPG, what the FPG, what is this, why are we doing it? We're going to take a quick tour of it, and then we're going to go into kind of some practical tools that people use. That will be over in the lab with Ryan and Cheryl and Eric and myself and Reina. And Gracia as well. Excellent, perfect. So that will be the plan moving forward. So I think most of us already know this, but why do we need to do field tests? Well, we already know that the performance of stoves in the lab and the field, they often differ. And most of the time, it's the field performance which is worse. So there's just a graph over here on the right of particulate emissions and traditional stove, rocket stove. Dark blue is the laboratory test, light blue is the field test. In both cases, you see that the particulate emissions from the stoves are several-fold higher. And so it's important to know how those stoves are performing in the field because, A, we really want to improve them. We want to get that feedback so we can say, well, what can we do to make those stoves better? And then also, we need to be able to assess the impacts that are happening for the end users, for the climate, for the environment. And in order to do that, we need to have estimates from the field as well. So it's really important to have good field tests. Unfortunately, doing field tests is not usually as straightforward or as simple as doing laboratory tests. So generally, they're more expensive. They're logistically challenging. They've got lots of moving parts, people to manage, lots of things to consider. The results are often more variable because you're dealing with conditions that are more variable as well. So you're going to get a bigger spread of data, which can make it harder to analyze. And that also means that you're probably going to need larger sample sizes. So again, that just means more logistics, more expense, more time. And because there are so many different considerations and contextual factors that are going into laboratory testing and the results that you see, sometimes it's more difficult to interpret the results. But given all of those challenges, it's still really, really, really important for us to go measure the impacts in the field. And so, because those are the impacts that are affecting users. That's why we're all here. We want to have good, clean cooking solutions for people. Okay, so let's talk about what the field testing guide actually is. And I've put together this presentation, and it follows an order because it turns out time goes in order. So you have to present one thing after another. It's just the way physics works, unfortunately. But when you think about doing a study plan, you go through a process that's a bit more iterative and back and forth. And so I've separated kind of what you need to think about into these different components, and we're going to go through it in sequential order, but it doesn't mean that that's how you actually do it. It's just that's how we're going to have to do it today. So the different components of this field testing guide that I put why it's actually here for. It's to help you match the methods and the tools that we have with your research needs. But I put the different components here. What is your actual research question where you're trying to answer your hypothesis? And then what do you have in terms of financial and technical capacities? How rigorous do you need the study to be? What level of assessment do you need? And then what are the protocols and tools that you have? Once you figure all that stuff out, that can help inform what you do for your study plan. How are you actually going to do the study? So that's the big picture of the field testing guide. How many of you know what the WHO catalog of methods is? Anybody? I do. Yeah. Okay, so that is part of the reason why perhaps we need this. The WHO catalog of methods actually has something similar to this, but it hasn't been used very much, and I think it's because it's maybe not so practical for people to use. And so this is somewhat of an update and also a different angle for doing this. So hopefully it becomes more useful. The idea here is not to provide just a catalog of methods, but to provide more context about how you use those methods and what you should or could do for your study. All right, so let's start with the research question. How do you formulate a hypothesis? What do you need to think about when you're saying, what should we actually study? This is a slide that many of you have probably seen, but this is a diagram of, it's kind of an abstract diagram of the environmental health pathway, which links the source of the pollution to the impacts that has. So when we think about stoves, we're always focused on this technology down here in the corner, the fuel and the technology, or this little system. But the impacts arise when they go through this whole system. So when you talk about health, for example, it's not just the stove. The stove produces the smoke. The smoke creates a concentration. That concentration causes exposure in different places. That exposure can cause the health impacts, right? And so it's a long link. And where you need to measure along that environmental health pathway is going to be it's going to be important for thinking about your research question. And it's the same thing for climate. If you're thinking about climate, you have your source here, but the emissions from the source, it's more complicated than just, oh, well, it's emitting less smoke or more smoke. You need to know the type of, is there black carbon? Is there methane? Where are you? What are the geographic conditions? Is this technology being used all the time or not? Is the fuel being harvested renewably or not? Lots of different things go into that. So when I think about a research question, usually I think about the environmental health pathway as a guide. The other thing, and I think Elmar brought this up yesterday, this is really important, and I think we all recognize this as well, but it's good to reinforce this, that the technology is just a technology, and it's the cooking system that really impacts the performance of the combustion and what comes out. So, it's not just the stove down here, it's not just the 3 stones, but you got to think about the fuel, the type, the size, the shape, pot, whatever cooking vessel is being used. That's going to have an impact on how the system is performing. The user, of course, that's a big impact on performance, lighting techniques, cooking practices, even in lab, how you're feeding the stove, how you're lighting the stove. That's very important as well. And then just breaking down the different kind of categories of things we usually ask questions about. So you might be specifically interested in the technology or the system performance. So fuel savings, emissions, technology adoption and usage, safety and durability. And these aren't exclusive, but it's helpful sometimes just to kind of categorize them at a high level. Health, so household air pollution, personal exposure, impacts or symptoms. You might want to have a study that's specifically looking at personal exposure, or maybe you actually want to try and measure acute lower respiratory infections. Environment, maybe you're very interested in the impact on ecosystems, so you want to look at the renewability of the fuel consumption impacts, also ambient air pollution, climate, forcing species, or social qualitative outcomes, so looking at the usability of technologies, user preferences, socioeconomic impacts, gender. All those are different things that you might be interested in. Okay, so now it's your turn to do some work. What is your research question? So maybe just split up along your rows. Like there are rows of mostly 4 people. Looks like you guys just have 2, so you may have to go find some people. Nice shirt. I like your style, Raymond. That is fantastic. So just a couple minutes. Come up with the research question. Doesn't have to be some amazing research question. Just something simple, just to think about this, and then we'll see what you guys come up with for a research question. Just a hypothetical research question.
How an improved cook stove may perform in field in terms of emissions and efficiency.
All right, awesome, straightforward. I like it. Anybody else? Yeah. Sam.
What is the health impact of a?
Oh.
What's the health impact of a fish smoking stove in Cambodia?
Whoo. Well, I think you have a prime chance of getting that one funded.
David and Elmar, you guys should talk.
Yeah. Cool. Dave. Oh.
Oh,
In Spanish? Yeah. Pesco.
Yeah. Okay, my question is, how will the CO2 that comes from stoves impact the climate of a place?
Impact what?
How will the CO2 impact that comes from stove that impacts the climate of a place?
Okay.
How will it impact a climate? I mean,
Excellent. Cool.
and there is another, I think, in our group. One more question here.
Okay. Exists difference about PM 2.5 about freestone fire and performance stuff.
Cool.
Improve. Existe diferencia entre la emisión de partículas 2.5 entre un fogón, 3 piedras y una estufa mejorada.
Right. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, in our group, we looked at the part for health, where we were asking the question, does the use of improved cook stove result in the cases of illness related to emissions, like coughing in a given village? Also, the other one was, does the use of improved cook stove in a given area lead to the reduction of cutting of tree and hence improved forest cover? Yeah.
Okay. Cool. One more, and then okay, two more. We'll do two more, and then we
So
move
the
on.
results in a field test are not as good as in lab. So by field tests, can we reveal areas of intervention and their feasibility, areas of intervention for improvement beyond the stove, so as we can improve the efficiency and productivity of stove in the fields as well?
Cool. Good. Oh, Jim, did you have one or? All right.
Okay, thank you. Our group, we came up with 2 of them, but we are choosing the first one. It says that what is the economic impact of clean cook stoves on households?
All right. Cool. All right. Those are all excellent, totally reasonable questions. One thing that's interesting, though, is just it's a vocabulary problem that we have, which is that we use the terms clean cook stoves and improved cook stoves, but we don't really know that often until we answer our research question. So sometimes it's really hard to come up with the term that you can use, but you could say the project stove or the intervention stove or the new stove, or if you know which stove you're actually doing, maybe you're doing a 2-pot Inkawasi stove or something like that. You could name the stove, but it's hard to say if a stove is improved before you've actually checked that it has improved anything. Okay, so next, financial and technical capacities. You can have a great research question, but if you don't have the money and the technical capacities to do it, then it's not going to be possible to do the study. So I've just gone through and listed some things to think about when you're planning a study so that you can figure out what level you're going to be able, what kind of, if you're going to be able to do a $10 million study or a $2,000 study. So first, what funding dollars do you actually have or are you applying for? And then think about what in-house technical skills you have. Do you have study design skills? Do you have measurement skills? Do you have analysis skills, reporting skills? All those things that go into a field study, do you have those in-house or do you need to go find somebody who can help you with those? And then also equipment and infrastructure. What equipment supplies do you actually have? What are you going to have to purchase? Do you have vehicles? All those things. And then finally, logistics, depending on where your study is going to be. That's going to impact the costs and how much time it's going to take. You're going to have to travel somewhere. All those are things that are going to impact what level of study you can actually do. So I think that's it. So very quickly, go back, pick one of those research questions, and just do a quick jot. We're going to spend 2 quick minutes. Otherwise, we're going to take too much time. But just jot down quickly what your resources are amongst your group, and then we'll see what you come up with.
It turns out that the fisheries are on a floating village 2 hours from the testing center and plus a boat ride. So we have to be able to get there and stay there for a few weeks. But we have the IIP meters, and there's also no power on the floating village, and so we have to bring some fuel to run the generators.
Nice. Well, a little complicated. Anybody else? Yeah, Joseph.
Yeah, so we have in-house capability to gather the data, analyze, and report, but we would need some resources to add to it.
What exact resources do you need?
Financial resources.
Hmm?
The funds.
Oh, the funds. Yes, that's a problem for most of us, right? Okay, yeah. One more, and then we'll.
First, we need qualified manpower, and in equipment, we need two type of equipment. First, portable equipment for field testing, and some basic equipment for lab testing, means including for PM light scattering based PM measurement, thermocouples, moisture meter, weighing balance, and for lab equipment, we fuel analyzer equipment, CHN analyzer equipment, and most important is funding from sponsors.
Yes. Again, the funding from the sponsors. All right. Thank you, guys. Oops. What is? There we go. All right. So the next thing to think about. So you have a research question. You've thought about your own resources or what resources you're going to go after, and then you might want to think about what level of assessment's actually required, or you might want to switch it around and think about what level of assessment is required first. Again, it's not really a sequential thing. It's just this is the sequence that we are presenting them in today. So, and in terms of levels of assessment, think about what kind of rigor you need. It's good to think about who your audience is. So reporting requirements for funder, that's going to really dictate exactly what you need to do. Is it academic research? Then you might have to be thinking about, well, if this is going to go to a peer review publication, what are the requirements for doing a peer review publication? Is it internal R&D, in which case that may have a lower level of assessment that's needed, but will be really helpful for your own purposes. Carbon finance, that's another thing to think about. And how is the data going to be used? If it's results-based financing, that's very important that you have good hard estimates of the impacts. Sometimes the data is used for inputs for models, or hopefully the data is going to be uploaded to the Clean Cooking Catalog.
Nice. Woo.
There we go. Got to plug in there. Or maybe it's part of the Alliance M&E plan, or maybe GIZ M&E plan, something like that. So all those are going to help guide how intense this study needs to be. So you can go from less intense, which I know Ryan doesn't like, with a pilot study, or you can do kind of basic monitoring and evaluation, and then more intense, the kind of most intense study that people do is an impact evaluation, which is a big formal type of study where you're really quantifying the impact of a program on a project. And I'm just going to go through this first one very quickly. I had this outline to kind of give some guidance around each of these different levels. But what is a pilot study? The applications, what are the costs? Study designs you might use. How far is it going to reach in terms of time? Will it look across seasons or just at one point in time? Geographic reach, are you trying to cover the whole area or just part of the whole project area, or can it just be a very local project? Measurement level, do you need really, really precise, accurate instruments, for example, or can they be more rough? And so I've gone through and I've done this for a pilot study, monitoring evaluation study, and an impact evaluation. Some of these things I kind of knew, some of them I didn't really know so well, but this would be part of the development of the field testing guide.
So you're looking for input.
I'm looking for input, but I know that we're short on time right now. But if you guys have thoughts on this, would love to hear them. And if this is something that gets developed further, I'm sure there'll be a lot more, there'll be many more opportunities to discuss and provide input on this approach. So I think we can probably skip this, but what level of assessment do we need? And I think Ryan already knows the answer. We need an intense level of assessment. So we'll skip this one though. And then protocols and tools, I want to get to this because this is kind of a transition to what we'll be doing now. And again, it's not so sequential. You might need to think about the protocols and tools before you've gone through all this, but for this presentation, we have a bunch of protocols that you could look at for measuring different impacts. So we have controlled cooking test, kitchen performance test, and then we have some things that you may not be as familiar with or don't really exist yet, but that we need. There's an uncontrolled cooking test, which is kind of, it's a thing, but it's not really formalized. There's the field emissions protocol X, which those of us who have done field emissions, we have protocols for our studies, but it's definitely not something that's kind of universal or has gone through a process that would make it a simple tool for everybody to use, like the kitchen performance test or controlled cooking test protocol. There is a household air pollution protocol. That's in the WHO catalog of methods, but again, it's not really used or thought of in the same way as these others. Stove use protocols, user preferences and feedback. We're going to get an example of that today. Oh, these are bolded because these are the things that we're going to be looking at the lab today. So controlled cooking test, field emissions protocols, and then user preferences and feedback, durability, safety. And then in the field testing guide, I'm imagining that you have a quick, just very quick summary of what the protocol is about, a link to it, and then a very quick description of what technical skills do you need, equipment requirements, some practical considerations. So it's all really handy to see exactly what goes into conducting that protocol. And then the other thing that I've done is link the protocols with the metrics. So protocols here, maybe hard to see back there, but CCT, uncontrolled cooking test, KPT, for example. These are all looking at fuel efficiency, primary outcomes, massive fuel per food cooked, per unit mass food cooked, or mass of fuel per task, or fuel energy per household. All these metrics, and then what level of assessments are these good for? So, for example, a controlled cooking test, that's probably okay for a pilot, or maybe for some monitoring evaluation. But a controlled cooking test probably wouldn't be good for impact evaluation because it's too limited in what it can say. It's not really looking at impacts at the household level. So I've given a little bit of guidance here. And again, this is just me writing stuff down, which isn't a bad thing too often, but it's better when I get help from others like you guys. So definitely looking for feedback on this as well. And I've just put a few here: fuel efficiency, health emissions, climate emissions. You could also have durability, safety, etc. Yeah, that's
About field WBT and then fuel efficiency?
Yeah, so a field water boiling test, that could be a thing to add in as well, and that can be useful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then I've come back here, and I've highlighted all of them because, again, it's an iterative process. You've gone through, you've thought about your research question, you've thought about your capacities, you've thought about what level of assessment you need, and now you've seen the protocols and tools. Now you need to go all the way back to your research question and say, you know what? Can't actually measure pneumonia because that's really hard and we don't have the resources. How about we measure exposure or household air pollution instead and use that as kind of a proxy indicator, and then kind of rethink all these different levels, and you go back and you eventually come to the point where you are able to develop a study plan that you're comfortable with and matches the resources and capacities that you have. I think, yeah, another thing that's going to be in here, I hope, is some things about best practices and reporting common metrics. But again, this is just it's not very well developed right now. It's just, I feel like it should be in there. So this is more my brainstorming than anything else. And I know we need to go, but I'd like to discuss this more. Do we have any time for questions or thoughts? I think that could maybe open up a can of worms. But
Well, let's open up a can of worms a little bit, and then we can continue to discuss in smaller groups as we walk as well.
And you know where to find me. You can always come ask me questions or give me feedback throughout the week, so, or next few days at least. Yeah, so any questions, any thoughts? Do you guys think this would be useful? Yeah, Dr. Prasad?
At what level do we, when do we think we can bring in the uncontrolled cooking test?
Well, in my opinion, I think the uncontrolled cooking test should be done relatively soon in a project. As soon as you have a stove that seems to be used in homes, I would definitely recommend using the uncontrolled cooking test because it's a very nice way to get some relatively quick feedback on different performance levels. I like it very much as a test. Yeah, so I would do it. I would try to do it as soon as you have a reasonable number of stoves that are actually being used in homes. Yeah, Jim.
Michael, you mentioned a household air pollution protocol that's in the WHO catalog of methods. Is that one being used in studies now? Or?
Kinda. So some parts of it are used. I haven't really gone and looked through it in a long time, but there are specific components of it that are used all the time. So one thing that is used is the standard way to measure 1 meter horizontally from the stove and 1.5 meters high from the stove to kind of approximate where somebody standing close to the stove would be exposed. So I mean that's one component that's used from that protocol, but it's not widely used. And yeah, I don't know how easy or how applicable it would be for a lot of people. Mm-hmm.
When we were discussing yesterday in groups, it was like the social and the technical part, and I think when we are going in the field and testing in the field, I think in any kind of test we need to fit in that part of social aspect, because there are many things. Yesterday Tim gave an example where people cook more because the fuel that they're using with the improved stove the consumption is reduced. Similarly, what we have observed is that if we supply the wood in the field, many times people use it conservatively because they know that if they save it, they can just keep it for themselves. Then there are many occasions when there's a special occasion in the house, maybe a marriage or something, or maybe they're not going to cook in the same manner as we are supposed to find out. So there are many aspects from the social perspective which need to be captured through a survey or something. Whatever kind of protocol we are executing, I think the survey component has to be there, because then we can get more information. So if we are getting results and we want to just cross check if this is why this is happening, then we can always go back to the survey.
Yeah,
that
and
way.
One nice thing about a lot of these methods is that you can overlay them. They're not.
Exactly.
Yeah, so if you're doing a kitchen performance test, you can add on relatively easily those questions that get at some of the factors, the contextual factors that are important as well.
How about the time? Sorry. How about the time factor for different pilot and impact and that?
Yeah.
How would you like to put some kind of?
Yeah, I would too. So a pilot, a pilot study that can be quick, fast. I don't think whatever you can do in a short amount of time is probably what you're looking for. Monitoring and evaluation, I think that should at least provide indications of how a project performs during the most prominent season where a project is happening. If it's an impact evaluation, you're probably going to have to account for the full range of seasons and even multiple years throughout that project. That's my rough sense, but again, it's something that would be nice to get agreement upon within a larger community.
David, ok, ce que je dis, ça sera en français. C'est une suggestion par rapport à la présentation. L'anglais est trop profond, on a du mal à retenir certaines choses. On a du mal à retenir certaines choses ou bien à comprendre exactement de quoi il parle. Par contre, si après la présentation, on peut avoir un résumé en français, ça nous sera bénéfique. Sinon, nous ne serons que des spectateurs et rentrerons produits, alors que ce n'est pas ça qui nous a amenés ici. Tu comprends?
Les présentations vont être données à la fin.
Après la présentation.
Ouais. You will give the presentation at the end, hein?
Ils vont
donner, ils vont distribuer les présentations. C'est plus facile à lire et à comprendre les entendre.
His suggestion is to have a summary of brief summary of the present. It's difficult for them to understand in English.
Does he want that right now? Does he want that right now or
No.
after?
After.
Can we,
Yeah.
one more question? Or
Yeah, one more, then I think we need to go do some science.
Do we need to compare lab result with field result?
I think that's good. I would like there to be a lot more comparisons of lab and field results, but there's no regulation that says you have to. But yeah, it is always good. I think that helps provide important context on both your lab results and also your field results too, because you can see how that device is performing relative to how it could perform if it was optimally used.
And, all right, we're gonna be.
Last
intense.
one.
I think you could even use the field results to help suggest how you could do things in the lab to be more representative of what's happening in the field. Like,
Kind of feedback.
And in addition to the details about when to use which tests and what's appropriate, I think thinking about the framework of a guide that Michael is proposing, what kind of tool and resource would be useful to you to help map through the decisions that you guys need to make about how do you choose when to do what? So thinking about how to make this a useful resource for everyone.